algebra friends. Welcome back to another algebra lesson. Today we are doing a 9.1.4 lesson together. And today our big question is just, now that we've really established some different methods and we've practiced them all, now we're just going to throw a bunch of quadratics at you and ask you, which method do you think you should use? And I'm going to pick some methods. I'm going to kind of talk you through my process, but you could totally use quad formula for each and every one of them, and it would work every time. So I'm noticing by looking at your work that a lot of people are really doing great with the quad formula. So if you are like, I'm never factoring, I don't want to do that, if I ask you to solve for the roots, you don't have to. So before we get started, I'm just curious and I want to make sure everybody has some type of calculator they're using. So let me know up top here, what do you prefer? Are you using Desmos or are you using a TI-84? Either like your physical TI-84, or I hope you have found the app if you want to use that. My answer, as you kind of saw in last week's video or last class's videos, I like to use both. So I really like Desmos for graphing, but for calculations, it's way easier for me to use TI-84. Okay, so with that, let's jump in here, guys. Examine the quadratic equations below. For each equation, decide what strategy and then solve the equation. And then if it's not working out, guys, you can always switch strategies. And then we should always check our solutions, okay? So for letter A, I'm actually going to throw it back to the diamond factoring method, just because these numbers look pretty nice. They don't look too scary, right? So my A is 1, my B is 12, and then A times C would be 27. So what multiplies to 27 but adds to 12? And again, if you don't like this game, you can use the quad formula and you don't have to think about factors. But 27, right, we've got 27 and 1 and then 9 and 3. So this one's actually not too bad. So 9 divided by 1, that's just going to be x plus 9. And then 3 divided by 1, that's just going to be x plus 3. So in factored form, it's going to be x plus 9 times x plus 3 equals 0. Now that I've got it factored, I'm just going to use the zero product property, which tells me that if I want the product to be 0, one of these factors has to equal 0. And I get x equals 9, and I get x equals -3. And remember, you can always look back to your diamond because my roots are going to be the opposite of whatever your P and Q are, your values right here. So you can always just look to those and grab the opposites if you'd like a little shortcut. Alrighty, to check your answer, I would plop that into Desmos. Just for the sake of time, I'm not going to walk you through checking each of these just because I don't want this video to be a million minutes long and bore you all. But you can type it into Desmos. You are capable. I believe in you. All right, let's try letter B here. So letter B is trying to trick us, isn't it, folks? It's got it equal to 6, but I know if I want to solve for my x-intercept, it needs to be set equal to 0. So I'm going to get it in standard form. So this is right what we were doing last week. I'll even write out my steps here. So -2.8 minus 6, that would give me -8.8 equals 0. And now, I don't know about you, but that quadratic looks icky. So I'm not going to try and think about what multiplies to a half times -8. No. I'm going to jump in and use the quad formula. There's no greatest common factors, right? These are all decimals. So I'm going to jump right in and use the quad formula. So it's going to be the opposite of 9. Ooh, and let me just take a moment. Again, you don't have to have this memorized. So I would just go right ahead, Google it, or look back on our previous practice. And I would just write it down right at the top of your paper so you have it to refer to. And then I'm just going to highlight under the root, right? That's my discriminant. So that's pretty important. Okay. So So moving on, I'm going to do the opposite of B, plus or minus square root of 9 squared minus 4 times A times C. Don't forget that negative, all over 2 times a half. Okay, so let's do this discriminant next. I'm going to use my calculator here. So 9 squared minus 4AC, negative 8.8, I believe it was. And I get 98.6, okay, for my discriminant. So definitely could not have solved this guy by factoring, because that is not a rational number. So there's good thing we use quad formula here. So we're going to get negative 9 plus or minus the square root of 98.6. And that's going to be all over, what's 2? And dividing by 1, that's just my numerator. So I don't even really need to write that, but I did. All right, let's keep moving here. Let's figure out what is the square root of 98.6. Okay, I get about 9.93 if I round to 2 places. So I get 9.93 all over 1. I don't need to write that anymore, probably. All right, so my first answer is going to be negative 9 plus 9.3. 9.93, I'm sorry. And then negative 9 minus 9.93, okay? So the 9s are going to cancel each other out, and I'm just going to be left with a positive 0.93 here. And then negative 9 minus 9.3, that's going to be negative 18.93. You can use a calculator if you're like, I can't add or subtract with icky decimals. Whew, so that's a little bit of a gross one. But we survived it. And again, check that answer, throw it on decimals, and make sure the intercepts get what we got. That's a great habit to get into. All right, let's try letter C here. Now, before I pull up my quad formula, I noticed that letter C is already factored for us, folks. So right away, I can jump to the zero product property by setting each of these equal to 0 and solving. Right? So don't make your life more challenging if it's already factored for you. They did the hard part. You just solve these little 2-step equations here. And I get these 2 x-intercepts. All righty. That one's a nice one. Okay. Letter D, they're trying to trick us, folks. Who is not in their place in line? You are the middle term. You need to get into the middle. And remember that minus is with the 2. It's a minus 2x, so stick it together. It's a little family. It's one little term, so it's got to stay together there. Now, these numbers don't look too gross, so I might try to factor, okay? So my A is 1, my B is negative 2, my A times C would be 5. But let's see what happens here, folks. When I try to get something that multiplies to 5 but adds to negative 2, I quickly realize, what? That's not going to work, right? 1 times 5, 1 plus 5 is 6. If I make them both negative, then it would be a negative 6. Like it's just not possible. So I'm starting to realize it's probably no real solution, but you might think back, hey, if it's going to be no real solution, I want to make sure I'm not just having a factoring brain fart. Why don't I try finding the discriminant and making sure I get a negative number? So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to find the discriminant, guys, not the whole thing, because I'm just checking my answer. And so it would be what? Negative 2 squared minus 4 times 1 times 5. So I'm just going to plop this into my calculator. And I'm not doing the whole quad formula because I'm just checking to make sure I'm not having a brain fart and that this is truly going to be negative. And what do you notice? It is negative. So we can say with with confidence, we found two ways to prove this is no real solution. And I guess if you graphed it, you would get a parabola that does not hit the x-axis. So whatever method you use, you will get to that same conclusion, okay? Which is a good way to know you are doing it right, right? Alrighty, let's do these last two here, folks. They are trying to trick us as well, aren't they? They are not set equal to 0. So your first step is to make sure they are set equal to 0. So I'm going to add 4 to both sides. Oops, but then I still have to subtract 8x. And that guy's got to go in the middle, right? Okay, and then I'm going to go over here. I'm going to choose to factor this one because it doesn't look so bad. So I've got A is 1, B is -8, and then A times C would be 16. So I'm asking myself, what multiplies to 16 but adds to -8? Okay, so I've got 1 and 16, 2 and 8, 4 and 4. So I like 4 and 4 because they make 8, but they've both got to be negative, right? Because a negative times a negative is a positive. Negative plus a negative gives me that -8. And so in factored form, I get x minus 4 and x minus 4. -4 divided by 1. All right, because it's the same factor twice, it's just multiplied by itself. I could write it as a square. And it looks like I'm just going to have one x-intercept here, and it's going to occur at x equals 4. And again, remember, it's always just going to be the opposite of what you have there. Alrighty, last one here, team. They are trying to trick us again, but we won't fall for it. I'm going to subtract 2x from both sides, and that's going to be like terms here, right? So -30 minus 2 would be -32x. Then I'm going to subtract 45 from both sides, and that's my constant term. That's my c, so I'm going to stick that at the end. Hoofda. I'm going to search for a greatest common factor, but folks, I don't think there is one, is there? So we could try to factor it using diamond, or we could quad. I'm going to quad formula this one because the numbers are so big that I just can't think what's going to multiply to some large number. So I'm going to choose to do the quad formula. So the opposite of -32 plus or minus square root of -32 squared minus 4 times 20 times -45 all over 2 times 20. Okay, so woofda, let's get this discriminant. Okay, so -32 squared minus 4 times a 20 and -45. What are we going to get for our discriminant? 46/24. Okay. Opposite of a -32 would just be, 32. So I get 32 plus or minus the square root of 46/24 all over 2 times 20, which is 40. Now let's break this up into our two answers. Square root of 46/24 is going to be 68, okay? So I get 32 plus 68 divided by 40, and I get 32 minus 68 divided by 40. So 32 plus 68 is going to make a nice even 100. So 100 divided by 40. And if you plug that into your calculator, I believe that's 2.5. For my first answer, x equals 2.5. 32 minus 68, let me think, what's that going to be? I'm trying not to use my calculator. I'm trying to use my brain. 32 minus 68 is going to be... I don't want to make a mistake. That would be so embarrassing. Okay, -36. I don't know why I couldn't do that in my head. Okay, negative 36 divided by 40, and if I want that as a decimal, I can put that in here, divided by 40, and that's going to be negative 0.9. All right, so